Well, greetings and salutations to the 310 tribe, wherever you may be. I hope you're having a great day, a great start to this week. Yesterday being Palm Sunday, and then going back a couple thousand years, relatively speaking, we would be in the Passion Week of our Lord. So, anyways, sorry for the delay. I got home and there was a slight emergency on some stuff going on, so I had to kind of tend with that first before I could do anything else. But here, give me 1 second. I am. There we go. Well, hello to everyone. I'm seeing, let's see, Pamela, Leslie, Await Him, Bima, Diane, Aldo, Annette, Sue, Joseph, LaDonna, Viking Loves Jesus. Hey, Mom, I'm on. Donna, Sarah, good to have you on, Sarah. Allison, Florida Mermaid, Bima Seed, if I hadn't said your name yet. Blue Stars, Jackie Christ, Jules, Sherry, Talia, Bulldog Garage Merch, Talia, I got Talia, Panache Fabian from Australia. Good to have you. Farrell. Okay, Tom L. E. Torres, Log Cabin Artist, SC Bach, Gloria Minix, and Cooper Murphy. Good to have all you guys. Again, sorry for my delay. But anyways, let's get rolling here. Got a busy day lined up. Let me get everything situated. And all right, Sarah, I've got the Telegram up, so got your question there. Okay. All right, let's get started. So today's going to really be over Revolution in Prophetic Affairs Volume 3. This is dealing with the political side of everything and how the paradoxical shifts will go about in this last generation. I'm working on one now that I'm really excited about. And I've got even Randy helping me a little bit, and some other folks, John and friend Timothy, just going over some stats and data with me. So once that's ready to go, I'll drop it and release it to you guys. And this may be one of the things, those topics that I end up speaking at, not only on here writing, but also on, doing video discussions on it, as well as maybe turning into a conference presentation. But that one is called World War III, from impossible to inevitable. And like I said, it's coming, and I may try and tie that in with the Revolution in Prophetic Affairs Volume 4, which is dealing with the prophetic wars and things going on ahead of time. So, all right, so let's get started. I got a quote here from Karl von Clausewitz, his epic, his watershed work on military strategy and warfare. His book is called On War, and he was a Prussian officer back in the early 1800s, and he wrote basically what has become standard dogma for military strategists for the last 200 years. So he's kind of like our modern day Sun Tzu in terms of his sayings and writings on the nature of warfare. So really, a revolution in prophetic affairs, a revolution in military affairs, was something that he coined back then, and I just kind of took that to the next level with the prophetic affairs. And he says, we see, therefore, that war is not merely a political act, but also a real political instrument, a continuation of political commerce carrying out the same by other means. And so his correlation and his understanding of conflict and war, obviously steeped in the early 1800s of the kind of the last age of back when Napoleon was around, and that form of warfare. Um, the principles that he, the warfare has changed, but the principles haven't changed. And so what he's talking about here is that war is an extension of politics. It's kind of the last straw that happens. And let me continue here. It says, it has been said and largely understood that the last days final government will have three main components to its structure: the political, economic, and the religious. As such, if we are indeed in the last days, we should expect to see all three advancing in equal measure. Thus, shifting gears away from technology for a moment, we'll look at the accompanying political movement that is accentuating the increasingly Orwellian technology that seems to be driving or at least complementing these increasingly disturbing political agendas. And what I'd like to really, I think this was intended on focusing on was, when you look at purely at technology, whether it's artificial intelligence, quantum systems, the surveillance society, biometrics, any of those, digital currency, those things are in and of themselves signs that point to the last days. They are the tools of the trade necessary for the beast kingdom to control the entire planet. However, those things in and of themselves are simply tools. How those tools are going to be used is going to be largely connected to today's discussion on the politics, the political side of it, because the people in charge are going to be driving the agendas that use those tools in order to implement the political agenda and religious agenda of the final beast kingdom. So Mark Twain once famously said, history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. And as such, when we note the monumental shift in military strategy away from the traditional means to that of Mosaic warfare, it begs the question as to why. Why is it necessary? Why does the most powerful nation in history need to worry about things like the asymmetric threats, civil war, civilizational collapse, or a new world order? And for those not familiar with the term of asymmetrical warfare, it's an unconventional strategies and tactics adopted by a force when the military capabilities of a belligerent power or belligerent powers are not simply unequal, but are so significantly different that they cannot make the same sort of attacks on each other. And so what that means is when the United States goes to war against the Taliban, it's asymmetric warfare because we have so many more powerful tools than they do. And not, excuse me, not just weapons, but means to gather intelligence, information processing, the supply chain, the logistics. I mean, everything that we have is 1,000 times better than what they have. So the battlefield, there's no battlefield advantage in regards to that. We simply just wipe them out every time we engage. So they've had to resort to low tech and ways to challenge that military power in a given theater. So back in the early 2000s, when the U.S. went into Iraq, I mean, we plowed through Saddam's army like it was a hot knife through butter. However, that once we got in there and got set up inside of Iraq, that turned into kind of a quagmire that allowed for a counterinsurgency to begin. And they know that they could not go toe to toe with us on any kind of battlefield because they would lose every single time. So they resorted to this counterinsurgency efforts to use IEDs, improvised explosive devices that they would place on roads and alongside roads and pathways that they knew the U.S. would travel. And the damage to a vehicle, aside from the loss of life and let's say a company of infantry guys were heading out on these vehicles and they're heading out to go to Solder City to go execute some kind of a search and raid or something. And on the way out, they hit an IED. Now, that mission they were going to do now is delayed. And whoever was on the receiving end of that obviously gets away to play for another day, right? Now the mission becomes tending to that vehicle, tending to the people that are in there that might be injured or wounded, getting the resources off, stripping that vehicle. I mean, that turns into the operation. So the insurgents then get a kind of a twofer when it comes to using low tech weapons to challenge U.S. hegemony. And what I mean is they disable that vehicle and they potentially kill. So that provides a huge publicity boost for them. And on the other hand, they prevent the operation that was going to happen from being carried out. So, and that goes the same with, shooting down a helicopter, anything like that. Those things will disrupt operations all the time. So they have to fight like that, and they blend back into the population because they have to fight like that because they cannot stand toe to toe with us. Which, because the U.S. has become so powerful, there's only a handful of places in the world where the U.S. is going to meet that kind of what they call near peer competition. And interestingly, if you were to go back, say, 10 years ago in the military, the idea of a near peer threat seemed laughable. It seemed so far off into the distant future that it seemed it was out of the realm of possibility. The whole idea of a large landscape, a European land war, that just seemed out of the question. It seemed unthinkable. And yet there were generals that were forward thinking enough to think, okay, well, we've spent, the last 20 years really focused on fighting dudes with towels on their heads from caves, firing AK-47s. And that was kind of aside from an RPG or an AK-47, that was kind of the extent of their technology. And we've done that, and we can do that all day long, every day of the week, twice on Sunday. And we've done it for years. We're very good at that, fighting those kind of people. But we've lost all those skill sets that we had when facing another armed army that wears uniforms, drives tanks, has jets, that someplace that we don't dominate the airspace because they can shoot our planes down, whereas the Taliban really couldn't. That's that skill set that was lost over time. Really, from 9/11 forward, it had been really lost. I'd even go back a little bit further. I'd probably say back to Somalia, 95. After the beating we took in Mogadishu, the U.S. said, "Hey, we need to really ramp up our understanding of urban warfare." All of that type of scenario. We had been so steeped in the Cold War that we had forgotten how to fight in urban operations. So it seems like we're always prepared for the last war, right? We're never thinking ahead to the next war. And with that said, now here we are in 2022, and Russia invades Ukraine, triggering the first, large land war in Europe since World War II. And, now that's become a huge challenge, and the American thinkers and strategists are having to dust off all their books and their manuals from Carl von Clausewitz and these other guys talking about land warfare in Europe. And that's where the issue becomes really kind of tantamount to starting over again. And now you're talking about a new generation of soldiers and probably mid-grade officers and enlisted guys who were never in the Army during the Cold War. The war on terror is all they've ever known. So it becomes a politically challenging to have to relearn everything again. And thus we keep repeating the same issues throughout time, and just the way it's been for the last, 2,000 years roughly, in these times of the Gentiles, where these Gentile empires rise and fall, and you're constantly having to relearn things. But now technology has advanced so quickly that now we're having to play catch up amidst all the other things that we have to play catch up on, like technology, the changing dynamics of the global economic systems, supply chain, logistics, finance, digital currency, the shifting political winds across the world. You've got kind of the world into two different groups right now. If you look at it from far enough away, and one group in the West wants a global new world order where there's a elite group of leaders at the top, and basically they control everything else. And in the Eastern side, you have nations like Russia and China who don't want to be under some global system like that. They want to be the ones controlling the whole world. So there's these kind of competing interests at force right now and at play. And, as Karl Rove once said, empires create reality. We are at the end of the reality of where America has dominated the planet for the last 70 plus years. That reality is beginning to fall apart. And we're looking at it now, and we see it in the form of polarization in US politics, the crumbling infrastructure in the United States, eroded goodwill the US has built up a century, built up over the last century, has now begun eroding very quickly. And nations don't trust us, our allies don't trust us, our enemies don't fear us. And so we're seeing all these things happening. And for most Americans who aren't into geopolitics or don't really keep up with international news, they're noticing the shift in power and this erosion through things like inflation, right? So the cost of things are skyrocketing. Seemingly every month, the price of things keep getting more expensive, more expensive. We're seeing it in the decay and the rot of the inner cities, where almost every inner city in the United States you can't live in or don't want to live in because of the crime and because of the corruption, etc. And those are two symptoms, but we also have things like open borders, all the illegal immigration coming through, all the fentanyl flowing over the border, that comes from China and is being funded from China to the cartels in retaliation for, in large measure, because we support Taiwan still. And I'll save that discussion for that subsequent article I was talking about at the beginning, but it's multifaceted, all the threats that we're facing. And we're not even talking about all of the imaginary threats like climate change and inequality and all these things that the political left really wants to drive. They want everything to be focused on that. At the same time, they're ignoring the real threats that are out there, that there are other nations that don't want to be under our thumb anymore. And they're becoming powerful enough to begin to challenge that in a number of different ways. So this is where all of those questions I asked in that second paragraph here, it says, why do we as a nation have to really worry about these things? Because we have to worry about it because we're at the end of our nation's cycle of power, and our reality is beginning to unravel very quickly. So simply put, our government can't any longer keep up with the rising tide of the technological advancements that are sweeping the planet. It's not just other nations that are developing weapons of mass destruction or weapons that could potentially be used as weapons of mass destruction, like artificial intelligence and so forth. It's private businesses, corporations, NGOs. I mean, there's a laundry list of players out there now who now have the ability, because the technology has made more things accessible to the larger amount of people in the world. And this has really created more of an even playing field across the states. And that advantage that we used to have of air dominance, land dominance, naval dominance, those things are being challenged by the rising tide of technology, and not even expensive technology, but cheap technology in the form of drones, and being able to swarm drones against an aircraft carrier, or all of the different ways that have come about now, cyber attacks. And so we're in a very, very precarious place as a nation right now. And to quote Glenn Beck in something along the slides, he was talking about where we are politically as a nation. He said that we're hanging by a thread, and the guy coming to save us is Edward Scissorhands. So we're in a very precarious place right now. Furthermore, you've got global dissatisfaction with the 20th century status quo. Just like there was dissatisfaction with the 19th century status quo, where nations like India, Burma, places all over Africa, all over Asia, who were, I'm trying to blank on the term, but they were the colonies of the European powers that had begun colonizing the entire world back in the 17 and 1800s. They weren't content with being under the thumb of Britain and France and Belgium and Germany and so forth anymore. They wanted to be their own independent countries. And so after World War II, excuse me, most of those countries, if not all of them, were released to become their own independent nations. And in the process of that, we're up to what, 193 nations now, and part of that is now that dissatisfaction now is stemming from their areas as independent nations because they're still kind of under the thumb of the American system. And not only that, but the people there that are in those particular places are dissatisfied with the way things are going, with the corruption and so forth. I mean, we have a number of different places in the world right now that are incredibly destabilized, like Haiti, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Mexico. I'd say probably most of Mexico is very destabilized right now by all the competing cartels that are there. And so it's a dangerous place to be in at the end of Pax Americana, at the end of in the collapsing or the last stages of our American empire before it, essentially falls apart. Now, on top of that, you've got powerful groups in America and in Europe who obviously are realistic enough to say, hey, what we're doing now in America, the way the world is operating right now is not sustainable. So they're planning ahead to 2030, 2025, 2030. And they're coming out with the Agenda 2030, the Great Reset, all of these different buzzwords that they're talking about, creating this new world order. And I don't mean new world order in the Aldous Huxley or Orwell sense of the word, but they don't see it that way. They see what the new world order means to them is a new global society that doesn't have any superpower ruling or dominating anybody else. That, whoever is the head of this global system, they're the ultimate authority. Everybody else is under them, subject to their fiats and dictates. So they don't care how America collapses. They just want us knocked down a few pegs so that we're on par with like France and Brazil and other countries. We're not. They don't want us to think of ourselves as being exceptional. So they are not. I don't want to say they're actively promoting this. I think they're actively preparing for the eventuality that the United States will no longer be where it is today. Will be collapsed, or will become something else. We won't be the United States of America. We'll be some other version of ourselves, some alternate reality of the United States. So, and let me just go back here to the chat real quick. I'm assuming I just kind of started. I'm good. Everybody can hear me. I should have checked early on, but I didn't. Okay, so when you look at what the folks, these elites in Europe and other places are wanting to do, it's not new. It's not some ingenious new plan that Klaus Schwab and other folks like him came up with. I think in the article, I kind of allude back to the reality that what they're doing is they're taking a lot of what the Third Reich had done, what the Nazis had done. And in so doing, you can see all the parallels to where they connect back with the Third Reich. And so kind of staying on the topic of the Third Reich for a moment. When you think about the Third Reich, the Nazis, I guess, a lot of people never asked the question, well, why do they call themselves the Third Reich? Why not the Second Reich or the Reich? Or why is it the Third Reich? So for the Nazis, this concept necessitates that there was a First and Second Reich. And in there, I put a little table that shows kind of the stages of Rome. And so in true, prophetic fashion, if you're thinking about the multi-metallic statue of Nebuchadnezzar with the two legs of iron, that they split, and then two, they morph into the feet and toes of iron mixed with miry clay. So in a real sense, Rome never collapsed. It's just kind of transmogrified into other things. It's become other things, but it's still Rome, right? In the collective sense of the word, right? So you have the regal period of Rome, 753 to 509 BC. That was about 244 years. You have the Republic in Rome, which lasted from 509 to 49 BC, and that lasted for about 456 years. Now, there were smaller incremental periods in here where you had the triumvirate, the dictators, and so forth. There was other little periods of time, but it came back to being a republic. And then you have Imperial Rome, which lasted from 49 BC to 476. So that was about 525 years. And that was the world that Christ came into when he was in the incarnation, when he came here the first time. And then you have the Byzantine Empire. So before Rome collapsed, Western Rome, right? It split in two. In 330, you had the eastern capital was put in Constantinople, which is now called Istanbul. And they believe themselves, because at this point they're largely Christian. And you already had the Edict of Constantine in 312. You had the Nicene Council 325. So Christianity at this point has already been established and normalized throughout the Roman Empire. But the Byzantines believed themselves to be the kingdom. And they began in 330 and they lasted till 1453 AD when the Ottoman Empire finally overthrew them, and they're in what is now Turkey. And they lasted for about 1,123 years. Now, in varying shades, right, in varying sizes. They weren't this massive empire that whole time, but they were constantly challenged by all these different Muslim caliphates that were rising up and dynasties and so forth. But eventually they were overthrown by the Ottomans in 1453. Now, backing up a little bit, the western side of Rome had morphed from collapse in the 470s in what is, Italy, and they were constantly being invaded by barbarians and all these different waves of barbarians, the Goths, the Visigoths, and so forth. They refounded their Holy Roman Empire under Charlemagne in the year 800, and that is where, in what is now Germany, right? And it wasn't called Germany then. It wasn't a nation. It was Germania was kind of the land area, the territory. And then that lasted to 1806. So that was considered by the Germans the First Reich. Now, the Second Reich, which came under, I know Otto von Bismarck was part of that. I can't remember if he was the prime minister or like the war minister, or whoever, but it was during that time period. They had the helmets with the little spike on the top. But they basically believed that they were the Second Reich, and they were a continuation of Rome. And they lasted up until the end of World War I. So you remember they got sucked into World War I because of the political alliances that had been arranged at this point in time. Germany basically had alliances with Austria-Hungary, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, as well as toward the end or right before the war began with the Ottoman Turks, and they were the central powers, and they basically allowed a situation unforeseen by almost everybody, and the set of circumstances were so improbable that it was. We look back on it now and just think, "Wow, I can't believe that actually happened that way." You couldn't even think of this in a movie, but you have the Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife Sophia, I believe. They were killed by an anarchist, a Serbian anarchist from the group the Black Hand, and he was assassinated while visiting Sarajevo, or I think it was in Sarajevo. Anyways, he was assassinated, and what is an archduke? I mean, that's a low-level, aristocrat kind of person. I mean, it's not like they had killed the emperor himself or some, the queen or some high-ranking prince or whatever. This guy was an archduke. He was really a nobody. But at this point in time, they used that as an excuse to declare war on Serbia. This is the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And the Serbians were allied with the Russians, who were under the Tsars at the time, Tsar Nicholas, I think the second. And the Russians came to the Serbians' aid, and then Germany came to Austria's aid. And so in this whole conflagration, the British and the French aligned with Russia against Germany and Austria. And so that's how that whole war kicked off. And then that at the end of that, 1918, the Germans lost, the Ottoman Empire lost, the Austro-Hungarian Empire was dismantled, and all of the territory that the Ottomans had controlled was also dismantled. So they, fearing another rise of an Ottoman Empire, the French and the British, even before the war ended, came up with a plan to carve up the Middle East. And so when you look at the Middle East, you see the beginnings of most of those countries. So I think Saudi Arabia came about, the Saudi Arabian Kingdom came about in 1932. You have Syria became a nation in like 1943, Jordan in 1942. I mean, like all of those countries around there, Lebanon, they had just gained their statehood right around that same time period. And so they now would become the part of the the new Middle East. And then, Germany lost territory. And Germany was responsible for repaying the Versailles Treaty that was signed in 1920. And it was so economically oppressive on the Germans, it collapsed their economy. The Second Reich basically fell apart. And this is where they have this hyperinflation, and people were getting paid like 2 or 3 times a day because the price of things were going up so astronomically fast. You got paid at lunch. At lunch, you went and bought bread. By the time you got for work, that price would have doubled. So when you see pictures of people carrying wheelbarrows around of Reichmarks, that's what it was. Their money was essentially worthless. So out of that misery and out of that desperation arose a political party led by a man named Adolf Hitler, a man that really nobody really knew much about. He had been a corporal in the First World War. He got injured. He was an artist and painter in Vienna. And other than that, he somehow got sucked into this whole political movement. And this political movement mixed a lot of different things together. They mixed this idea of being the Reich, an extension of Roman power. They mixed in this idea of Aryan supremacy, and Aryan supremacy in the sense of racial superiority. Excuse me, I got dry throat. And this idea of Aryan superiority wasn't original to them. I mean, this had come from decades now of science and academia promoting things like eugenics, social Darwinism, that humans, different races within humanity, some were superior than to others, and so on and so forth. And that stemmed from Darwin, right? So you have kind of the scientific, anthropological side of it, social studies kind of side of the equation, and then you had on the political side an embracing, in large measure, of things that John Hegel had come up with, that talking about not just the Hegelian dialectic. I mean, that was a tool for a process, but he believed that the state was supreme. And then even if you go back to Thomas Hobbes in his book Leviathan, talking about that the state is kind of the highest form of being. And so he blended, I don't want to say Adolf Hitler uniquely, but part of his understanding politically was in what we call fascism, which is where the state controls most of the economy, if not all of the economy. And there is a definite tie-ins at every point where the state is having a say in how the economy is run. And so they blended that in with what was then the anti-Semitic zeitgeist of the day that had been popularized by Roman Catholicism. In one hand, because the Roman Catholics believe that they are the kingdom, right? And they believe they wrote the Bible. They believe that Peter was the first pope. So they really believe that Israel is inconsequential now to anything. And that was also married on the Protestant side with a lot of Martin Luther's later ranting and ravings about the Jews were evil, and how anti-Semitic he became toward the end of his life. And so Hitler from both sides of the aisle could take, both from the Catholic and from the Protestant, and promote this idea, or help popularize this idea, that the Jews weren't human anymore. They were subhumans and worthy of just being destroyed. And they were the cause of all their problems. And so this idea became popularized. And, so now you're looking at the Third Reich, you're looking at it from all these different angles. You're starting to see how a very modernized nation like Germany had been, could get swept up in this kind of evil empire that would become the Third Reich. Now, on top of that, you have Islam was becoming a force to be reckoned with in the Middle East, with the discovery of oil, and becoming, that was becoming, because of how fast the revolution in military affairs had occurred inside of World War I. Remember I talked about how at the beginning of World War I, guys were riding in on horses with their muskets and their flags, and they're charging the battlefield, and they're just getting mowed down by the other side, who's got machine guns and tanks, right? So they rode into World War I on horses, and they came out on the other side riding planes and tanks and machine guns, wearing gas masks. So it was a huge shift and change. And so when that change happened, and they started developing all these vehicles and machinery, well, those machineries, all that machinery and the weapons and vehicles, they need oil. So that's what gave rise to the power and influence of the Middle East, who now had easy access to oil that was near the surface, and it was easy to pump out, high grade. And that's what gave Saudi Arabia and nations like that have oil there, their immediate prestige and influence. They're now be able to push back, and they're Muslims, right? So the Muslims hate the Jews as well. So, I mean, for Hitler, it was the enemy, and my enemy is my friend, right? So he's friends with the Arabs, he's friends with the Iranians, who at the time, the Iranians were, and this is something new that I learned. I didn't know this, but in 1935, Reza, whoever the Khan was at the time, Reza Khan or something, he changed the name from Persia back to Iran. And Iran is the original name of what we call today Iran. I used to think it was just Persia. I thought Persia was the original name, but if you go back far enough, even before Cyrus and the conquest of Babylon and so forth, the Medo-Persians, before all that, they called themselves Iran and Iranian, because it's I guess in that language, the Persian language is or Farsi is Aryan. So they consider themselves the original Aryans. So obviously, Hitler is drawn to this kind of thinking. So he partners up with the Iranians and then the rest of the Muslims in the Middle East, because they equally share this dislike of the Jews. And so, not to go too much into more on the history of everything, I want to read some of these, and some of these I'm not going to be able to read without getting this video banned or whatever. But there's a lot of correlations between what the Third Reich championed and what is being championed today by the neo-progressives, the really woke left, and all those folks. In the article, you can see my friend John actually wrote this up, but you can see in the bolden sentences, that's what the Nazis did, and below that, what we're doing today. And it's part and parcel the same thing. It's just being repackaged and recycled, for a modern audience. And so they believe, they worship the earth. They understood. They were fast. They understood the ways that they can manipulate particular religions in order to carry out their agendas. They experimented on people. We see that today with the whole movement to, chop body parts off and stuff, especially with children. They're very much steeped into the occult. They desired to get rid of the world's useless people. Back then, it was the Jews and the gypsies and the communists and so forth, and invalids. And nowadays, obviously, it's if you just don't feel like living anymore, especially if you're in Canada, you can say, I need to go kill myself in this health center or something. They locked people in the ghettos. They were fanatical about order and about surveillance and numbering people, and you can see all the correlations in there. So, but fascinating and sad at the same time, because we're seeing all this stuff being repackaged and sold to us as some brand new thing. It's not. And so I put on here the new gatekeepers, the same as the old gatekeepers. So they're same people, same mindset, same kind of thinking. And the only thing that's been added to this political, this toxic political theory is technology. Thankfully, the Nazis back in World War II time period and earlier didn't have the same technology we have today. I mean, if you were to change just a few things, I mean, pretty much all of Europe would still be speaking German today. If, for instance, you gave Hitler or the Third Reich, you gave them the atomic bomb early on, or they had discovered it before us, certainly that technology would have been a game changer. If you'd have given them Google Earth, if they had the capability of seeing Google Earth and seeing things in real time around the world, I mean, that would have been a huge game changer. But anyways, all that to say, thankfully they didn't have it. But now the same type of political mindset that's poisoning leaders from around the world, not just in Europe, but people are buying into this ideas. They're buying the same political agenda that was popularized by the Third Reich. It's the same thing. It's just being repackaged and sold as something new, and they're buying into it, hook, line, and sinker. And so that's the danger we're at today. Is not only are they buying into this political theory, but they also have the technology to implement these kind of grandiose, sweeping changes around the world, which is why they think that they can implement a new world order by 2030. They're pretty confident about this. Now they're going to have to do some nudging here and there to push nations over the edge this way, that way, and get things cooking, right? To kind of speed it up to make sure they stay on their timeline. But I'm fairly confident that they can probably achieve what they want to achieve when they want to achieve it by, which is driving a lot of what we've seen since 2020. Like, why did Biden get into office of all people? And why have things gone in the way the world has in the last 3 or 4 years? It's because these people, the powers that be, can nudge and can influence the right places to make things happen in a way that doesn't make sense to the rest of the population. And below that, I also kind of tied in all the correlations between how they thought economically versus what we're doing today economically, and from not just an economic perspective, but a financial perspective and a logistics perspective of how there's so many correlations to the way that they viewed their situation there in the 1930s and 1940s. Now, early on, before World War II kicked off officially in September 31st, 1939, the Germans had a 4-year economic plan. And let's just say it began in 1933, because I'm not exactly sure what year it began. It may have been 32, but for sure 33. And it would go for 4 years. And so that economic plan was built almost entirely on credit. And they'd even created this new kind of widget, like today we have like Bitcoin and things. Well, they had a widget like Bitcoin back in the 1930s called I think it was called a MOFET. And it was like a IOU, if put in that way. and it was a promise to repay once the economy was back up and running. So they would get investors, and Hitler's economic guru was getting all this stuff ready. They basically kickstarted their entire economy on credit and got it roaring back to life. And very quickly, though, he began to focus on armaments, right? So as they came to the end of that first term of the 4-year economic plan, their economist, who's not in the know about what's going on, he's thinking, we're going to repeat what we did so we can start repaying back a lot of these debts that we owe, and kind of helping establish ourselves. That's the way he's thinking. Hitler's thinking, no, I'm taking over. I didn't come here to take part. I came to take over. It was his mindset. So in the second iteration of the 4-year plan, it's all about war. And he begins to heavily invest in and rebuild their war stockpiles and things like that. And so the economists that we're disagreeing with are saying, hey, we can't, because they're not knowing, we're looking back on this in hindsight thinking, oh, they should have seen it coming. They didn't know. They didn't know that their leader, Hitler, was about to invade all of Europe, and take over everything. So they just were under the impression that he was just trying to rebuild Germany so it could become powerful again as a powerful nation. And somewhere down the road, they would begin to expand and, but no, Hitler was thinking right then and there, like he wanted it done right then and there. So their shift in the economic plan and the second iteration of it now is entirely focused on war, because in his mind, he's already seen how this is going to play out. He's going to invade Austria, Czechoslovakia, and then boom, straight into Poland. And it's going to go from there, right? So he already knows where this is going to go. Everybody else is thinking that he's just trying to rebuild the economy. Now, I mean, Hitler had been on the cover of Time magazine. He had a lot of fans, if I can put it that way, here in the United States, in the guise of George W. Bush's grandfather. George, I think his name was George Nelson Bush, Henry Ford, the CEO of various banks and companies, all thought Hitler was doing an amazing job. Now, obviously, this is before World War II officially started, but leading up to it, they all thought he was a great guy, and he had this genius plan for rebuilding his economy. In reality, Hitler knew that he had to rebuild it first, but the second step was going to be starting to take things by conquest. So if he had borrowed money from, say, Czechoslovakia, and he built 10 factories from that money, and then that factories were making pots and pans are then quickly shifted over into making artillery shells. And now he shells and takes over Czechoslovakia, so he doesn't he doesn't have to pay him back. He just he owns them now, right? And so I think a lot of what we're seeing today is that we are not in the know about what the higher ups are planning on, what they plan on doing. And I mean higher ups, I mean like World Economic Forum, the inner circles with those groups, and other globalist organizations. And when they meet at like the Bilderberger conference every year, or they meet at these secret meetings and have these little huddles and they get together, they're discussing what they're doing in the future, but none of us really know unless somehow it miraculously gets leaked out. Then we find out, oh, they want to pass this thing where they're going to give us fake meat, or you might get some quotes from Harari or some other folks that this sounds very troubling or whatever, but they already know, like for them, September 31st, 1939, the moment that Hitler launched the Blitzkrieg into Poland, they had that day planned for a long time. But for everybody else, it was a shock. It was this black swan event. They didn't see it coming. And I think that right now they have 2030 in mind. And so that's when they feel like they should be running everything on the planet. Not when they start to run things, but when they should be in full swing of running things. So we're starting to see things happening and unraveling now at an increasing pace that most people are scratching their head trying to figure out what is going on. Why are we doing these things? Why it seems so antithetical to like running a country or running an economy. Or why would we keep open borders when they're bringing in thousands of pounds of fentanyl and other drugs that are killing thousands of Americans every year? I mean, it's this huge crisis all over the place. Why are we doing these things? Because they already see the end state. They're not worried about how they get there. For them, the ends always justify the means, right? As long as they end up at this place by 2030 and whatever that looks like to them, then that's success. They've achieved their goal. For the rest of us who think that life is just going to keep going on and on and on the way it is today, and I don't mean necessarily this audience, but like people in general in America or Australia or Canada or wherever, we just think things are going to continue on. And they've already, I mean, the folks in the know now, the folks in power now already know how things are going to end or change by 2030. And so they're not, you don't see them sweating bullets about all this. They don't, to them, they don't care how we get there. They just care that we get there to this stage where the United States is no longer a global player or a superpower anymore. And so that's a lot of what we're seeing happening today. All right. I don't want to keep, you guys can read the article. And I really want to save kind of the gist of this ideas, particularly with World War III, for the article that'll be coming out shortly. And there'll be a lot of graphics and stuff in there. I might even have to put some videos in there and stuff too, but it'll be pretty cool to look at and to see how I'm seeing things, right? And so let me transition here to, you got to forgive me, my allergies are killing me right now. Let me transition here to the chart I put together, and I'll bring it up here on the screen for everybody to look at if you haven't seen it. On Telegram, I have it both as a PDF and as a JPEG, and however you want to, whatever works for you in terms of viewing it. It's there for your guys' use, however you want to do it. But let me just say that, like, for the watchmen out there, especially on YouTube and, particular ministries and things like that, it feels like, everybody's kind of got their little niche, where they fit in and where they, and that's good. I mean, that's really why God has, chosen us from a variety of different backgrounds and walks of life. I've always been interested in geopolitics and international relations. Going back to my college days, I majored in it, minored in Russian and military history, and so this has kind of been my wheelhouse. Now, with that said, I was supposed to be brought on to the Omega Letter back in the day, 2011 timeframe, under the guise of speaking to a lot of this stuff. But because I was still active duty and I still had my active clearances and all that stuff, I was really not keen on talking about that stuff. And so I delved into other areas and mostly prophecy, apologetics, and that sort of thing, dispensationalism. And that's where I feel like I'm kind of a child of two worlds at this point. So the reason I even did an article like this, a revolution in military affairs, is where I'm kind of blending things in from Clausewitz and from military strategy and that into the prophetic. It's because I don't see it necessarily being done by hardly anybody else. And I'm not trying to toot my own horn. This is kind of like my thing. This is like what I'm into, what I'm passionate about. Some guys are into football, some guys can name every player on a baseball team on 1962, and they know all that stuff inherently because that's what they're passionate about. And this is what I'm passionate about. And I love seeing how this stuff unfolds on the global stage today. And I feel like I don't want to sound crazy when I talk about this stuff, and I don't want to sound arrogant either, because I don't know the future. I have a pretty good track record. I mean, in terms of things I've saw coming and predicted and so forth. But by no means do I know what's exactly going to happen. I don't. I just kind of take a look at what's happening now. I have a decent working knowledge of history and technology and economics and stuff like that. So then I kind of draw, these things start swirling in my mind. I think about them all the time. So that's how it ends up becoming an article. Now, granted, there's been times where, I've gotten things hilariously wrong, But there's been a lot of times where where the things I was sure about, like the things I was like, man, I was very confident about because of just looking at everything from a collective, from a kind of the stepping back and looking at the entire picture. Um, I I just drew certain conclusions, and those conclusions end up becoming right, 9 times out of 10. So I begin to trust that intuition in a large degree. But by no means, if I talk about things that can be upsetting to some folks, especially the way I write or the topics I write about or the art that I choose, my intent is not to scare anybody. My intent is simply to show you um, this is how I see things going forward. Now, God is always in control. God is sovereign. The Holy Spirit, and as a restraining force on the planet. I mean, so many things can change between now and then. We don't know specifically. And just like the picture that has the prophet that's looking, I think Clarence Larkin drew it first, but the prophet's looking out over the horizon, and he can see these mountaintops, mountain peaks. And on these mountain peaks, he sees the major prophetic events that are going to come in the future. But what that prophet doesn't see is the valleys. He doesn't see what's happening in between those two mountain peaks of prophecy. And so there are going to be things that happen, as early as today going forward that we just nobody really saw coming, including myself. Um, Things like, the COVID vaccine, or, COVID, when the whole thing came out in 2020, the abandonment, the way we abandoned Afghanistan, the invasion of Ukraine. I mean, there's so many things that are happening now like almost on a daily basis now that nobody can really see coming. And that's the humbling part of it too, is realizing that I can't name everything. I can't see into the future, but hopefully I'm wrong on some of this stuff too, because some of the stuff that I'm going to talk about in this upcoming article is disturbing. And I don't necessarily want it to happen. I feel in my gut that it's going to happen like that. So I just wanted to give that primer out, just because, I don't get a whole lot of time to talk about this with folks, explaining why I think the way I do. I'm not anti-America. I love America. I love growing up here. I grew up in the 70s and the 80s, probably the two greatest decades in American history. And, it's sad to see things unfolding the way they are. And so I don't know who it was. Somebody had a meme they posted, and it said in there, whoever stole the Harper's, I think it was Harper's, but the Harper's sports statistics book from 1955 to 1985 or whatever it was, whatever that the book was in Back to the Future 2, where Biff goes back and he steals that book, and then he becomes rich, and because he became rich and wealthy, the whole world was like just ruined. And so the meme was like, whoever stole that book, can you please take it back and put it back in 1955, 1980, wherever it came from. So just, I feel like we're living in this alternate reality of the way life was supposed to be. So anyways, okay, so let me bring this on here. And after this, I will get to your questions. All right, let me see if I can make this bigger. All right, so hopefully everybody can read this. Somebody, and I can't remember who it was. So if it was you, please raise your hand. But somebody in one of my previous live streams had asked about a prophecy chart that had like current events going into the time before the rapture. And I can't remember who it was, but anyways, that's where this whole thing stemmed from. And so I'm always used to seeing prophecy charts kind of looking at it from the side, and you have, like a line going across the page, and it's got this, and this, and this happening. And, we've got the time frame in there, and 3.5 years here and 3.5 years there. We got the labels and all that stuff. But they wanted to see it all the things that were happening prior to that. So I thought, man, that's a pretty good idea. I just don't know how to do that. And so that idea is rolling around in my head. And eventually I start with the line, instead of going along the side, I just started down the middle vertically, and where what would be called the portrait view. And I didn't even intend for this to be, with the wicked on the left hand side and the righteous on the right hand side. I didn't intend to start that way. I just kind of started with the four horsemen as kind of a starting place. I put those there. And really the stuff here on the right hand side, was everything leading up to the rapture of the church. And so if this thing were like, a poster size, I could have probably put in way more stuff in there, but just doing this on a normal, PowerPoint page and then flipping the page, I kind of just had to make do with the space that I had. But on the right-hand side, you see the events going on in the world. I start there with the crucifixion, right? So this is really the birth of the church, or not the birth, but the conception of the church. And going forward to the siege in Jerusalem, and then the destruction of the temple and diaspora, and then I go through the 7 letters to the 7 church eras time. Now those eras on the right, the 7 church eras, isn't meant to be. Those are like estimates. That's not meant to be, specific. Like the Laodicean era did not begin specifically in the year 1800. But in the 1800s, we saw the recycling and repackaging of all of these ancient heresies that had been around in the early church, now started to come out in new ways in the form of like Jehovah's Witnesses, the Latter-day Saints, Unitarianism, so on and so forth. So we start to see these things recycling themselves and being brought back into time here. And for some, I guess there's some folks that are asking, why do I say conception? Why do I say the conception of the church instead of the birth of the church? Well, the reason I say conception is because when Mary was overshadowed by the Holy Spirit, when the angel Gabriel came and said, hey, you're going to have a child and he's going to be the Messiah, and so on and so forth. So when that actually happened and the Holy Spirit overshadowed her, she did not give birth right then and there. She didn't have Jesus, that second. She went through the normal stages of pregnancy, the whole 9 months of pregnancy and the different trimesters. And then when he was born, right? Now, likewise, when the Holy Spirit was given on the day of Pentecost, and coming down as cloven tongues of fire, etc., I don't think the church was born there either. The church wasn't born that day. The church was just beginning. And so during this whole time, we've been, this church age now has been almost 2,000 years. We've been going through spiritual utero, and we've been growing and coming together as a body of believers over all these generations. And just like Paul talks about in 1 Corinthians like 12, 13, and 14, we're all these different body parts. We have all these different callings and gifts. And we make this beautiful tapestry that is, we are both corporate in the sense that we're scattered all over the world, but we're also singular in the sense that we are the body of Christ, singular. And so we are still in the process of growing, and this kind of mirrors the stages of salvation. You have justification, sanctification, and glorification that talks about in Romans 8. The justification portion is a one-time event where your faith in Christ through his shed blood and through his finished work on the cross justifies you and makes you now righteous before God, because you're not coming with your own righteousness, you're coming with Jesus, his son's righteousness, covering you. And that's a one-time event. You can't repeat that. Once you're saved, you are a new creation, as it says in 2 Corinthians 5, 17 through 21. You can't undo that either. Your good works can't save you, and your bad works can't unsave you. It's not even about you. It's when you place your faith in the Lord Jesus Christ, you're turning over everything to him, saying, I can't do it, God. You have to do it. And what Christ finished in you, what Christ began in you, he will finish with you. He is the author and finisher of our faith. Now, when you're saved, when that moment happens, you are then indwelt by the Holy Spirit. Now, for the rest of your life, let's say you get saved at the age of 6 or 8, whatever, and you live to be 99 years old. That whole time period is sanctification. This is part of where you're growing and maturing as a believer in Jesus Christ. And whatever those gifts and callings were to you are those things that you're supposed to mature in. God didn't call me to be a singer. I can't even, I mean, I would be poor. I would be in so much debt if I was relying on my singing to pay the bills. I'm just not called to do that. I'm not called to any kind of music necessarily. I don't have that gift. I don't have it. I mean, I can monkey around with the guitar, but I can't, like, turn it into a beautiful song and sing it and play it for the audience like Sarah can. There's plenty of people there to gift with that. My wife's a beautiful singer. I mean, has an amazing voice. I sound like a dying chicken next to her when I'm at church singing. But all that to say is that we are all growing in the faith and maturing in the faith in this long process called sanctification. And at the end of that, whether you die before the rapture or you are transformed at the rapture, that is the birth, because all believers from past, present, past all the way up to the present are going to be transformed in a blink of an eye, a twinkling of an eye. Those who have already died will come back with Christ in their spirit form, and they will be married up with their now immortal glorified body. And those of us who are still alive and remain, we are going to be translated right then and there from mortal to immortal. So one of the reasons I like to think of this process as conception, with Acts chapter 2, and then the process of being in spiritual utero, is that all pregnancies come to an end. They don't just go on and on forever. They have to come to an end. There is a point when the baby is born. And so I think that we're coming up at the end of the last trimester. We're about there. And I think this is what we see here in this. Everything below the rapture of the church is what I would call the birth pangs. These are those things that are foretold by Christ in the Olivet Discourse, and what were foretold by the Old Testament prophets, and what was written about by the apostles. That we're starting to see all of these things happening in every spectrum that things can happen in, from the cosmological, with all these crazy blood moons and eclipses and this and that, and these comets and the alignment of the planets, and all these things that seemingly only happen once in a generation, or once in 100 years, or once every 500 years, or once every 2,000 years. They all seem to be happening now. And so I'm not trying to ascribe any prophetic significance to the upcoming eclipse in and of itself. I'm saying that as these things are happening with more rapidity, it seems like I'm taking the whole thing collectively as a sign that these are things that are supposed to wake us up, right? And the same thing with technology. Up until the 1900s, we were limited to the speed of horse, and then the automobile was invented, and then the Wright brothers mastered man flight, and it just kind of took off from there. And we've just had this exponential growth in technology that has pushed us through very rapidly 3 different industrial revolutions: the second, third, and fourth. And now we're at the kind of the end of the fourth, moving into like the cyber physical age, right? And all of the geopolitical stuff that was happening prior to 1914, I think, was stage setting to a large degree. But what we've seen since 1914, since the beginning of World War I, has been these last minute touches to the stage. And now the actors are on the stage, and all they're waiting for is the curtain to go up. And the audience is out there, chomping on popcorn, waiting for everything to happen. And it should be any second now. And so the next thing, and I would consider us the fig tree generation, going back from 1948 till present. So, on top of the concept of this being the last part of the pregnancy for the church, we're also coming up on that time frame that Moses speaks about in Psalm 90, and between the 70 and the 80 years, and also during this time period, the world has advanced rapidly, technologically, economically, politically. I mean, every way you can measure this, it's happening across everything, and it's also converging at the same time. So the rapture of the church for me is the next major event, and that is where we are born into the bodies and into the forms that we will be forever. You know, I I've always wanted to grow sideburns. I can't physically grow sideburns. About the best I can do is get some from the store and glue them on. I just can't. I have too much. I'm either too much Native American, or I don't know. I just can't do it. And so I'm looking forward to having these big mutton chops in the Kingdom Age. Hopefully I'll have these big mutton chops, going forward. The big mustache with like the curly ends and stuff. Um, anyway, so that's going up the right hand side, and then we start to see things happening. There are certain events that happen that I'm not 100% sure on, like the Bema judgment. I don't know when exactly that happens. I know it happens once we're up there. I don't know if that's like the first thing we go through as we go there, or if it's something that happens a little bit later on, or sometime, and also understanding that we're stepping out of time. We're going to be here the moment the rapture happens. We're being transitioned in a moment, in the blink of an eye, from being in time to now being in the eternal state, the eternal order. So now time works differently in the eternal order. So hypothetically, let's say that the rapture happens tomorrow at noon, right? And we're all, within a minute, we're all gone. And let's say that the rapture happens at 12 noon, and we're translated instantly into eternity, into the eternal order of things. And we could undergo the entire church age. Everybody could go through the Bema judgment individually, right? And back here on the earth, it then changes to like 1202. I mean, that could all happen within a minute. Like, I don't. So there are things that I don't understand regarding how time works in eternity, is what I'm trying to say. All I'm saying is that it happens, and I don't know exactly where to place it. It's just somewhere once we're translated and taken up out of here. But on the earth, you have a number of events that are beginning to happen on the left-hand side. You have what I would call today the Antichrist zeitgeist. I've used that phrase a lot, but you have the spirit of Antichrist ramping up today, and we're quickly abandoning the whole Judeo-Christian concept of morality and embracing paganism. And as you know, with paganism, you have many gods, and with many gods, you have many different kinds of morality. So across the spectrum, we're starting to see this Antichrist fervor going across the world. And we saw it recently when Israel was attacked. There was probably about 3 or 4 days of like solidarity with the nation of Israel. Then it quickly turned into Zionism, and then it turned into anti-Semitism. So you have all of these things kind of just now been right under the surface all this time. Now it's just boiling over. And I think the same thing will happen with Christianity as well. And then at the rapture of the church, whenever that happens, you have a period of time. We don't know how long the gap is. I put in there these gap events here on the left-hand side. You have the collapsing of the United States. You have the arrival of the two witnesses, the Gog and Magog war, Psalm 83, Isaiah 17, rebuilding third temple. These are all just things that I think should happen in between the rapture and then the official start of the 70th week. I don't know if all those things will happen. Those are just logical things in my mind that seem to happen in our absence, right? We know there's no nation like the United States that comes to Israel's aid during the Gog and Magog conflict. There isn't. There's the sons of Tarshish, and there's the young lions of, thereof, and you have Dedan, and talking about Saudi Arabia, you have these other countries that are not getting involved. They're like, I don't think you should be doing that, but we can't stop you. If the United States were in the equation, obviously there would be some kind of aid or response from the United States. We saw that even here on October 7th. The U.S. immediately began to deploy carrier groups to that area, and just to prevent it from expanding into a much wider conflict. And so, there's nobody like that to even remotely challenge this new coalition that's coming. Now, what I don't have in here is World War III, and I'm becoming increasingly convinced that there will be a World War III prior to either right before or right after the rapture of the church, and that will also help set the stage for what will come later with Gog and Magog. Okay, so then you have the going forth of the horsemen as Jesus opens the seals. Obviously, he opens the first seal, and then the first rider goes out. Now, one of the questions that I have, and I think my view on this has probably changed a little bit over time, is this rider on the white horse, is this the Antichrist specifically, or is it the system that he represents? Is a system going forth? And that may be in the form of these 10 kings or these 10 regional leaders or whatever. We don't really know what that looks like just yet, but the white horse goes forth and it does this political conquest. And so whatever it is, it ends up bringing everybody under this one system. And the second horse that goes forth, that's open from the second seal, is that peace is taken from the earth. Again, if this one system goes forth, it's logical to conclude that there's going to be groups and nations out there that don't want to be a part of it, and they're going to fight against us. But I think it goes even further down the line to even citizens, people, neighbors, family, turning on each other. It says that peace is taken from the earth, and that violence is going to be everywhere, and not just kind of like a gnat or something flying around here. Not just the earth, or not just humans, but animals. The animal world will also become very hostile to people, and I would assume plants and everything else. And then you have the economic disparity, scarcity, and starvation that comes forth from the third seal that's opened. And again, that seems like a logical conclusion coming forth out of conflict and war that's going to disrupt all the supply chains and the economics of every nation or every group that's there in this time period. All that stuff's going to be messed up. So we've seen that, that at least is very common with conflicts and war. One of the biggest killers of people in conflict is not the actual war itself, but it's like pestilence, diseases, starvation, and that stuff, the effects of it. And then obviously the fourth horse being the pale horse, rides forth with death, and then he has hell following with him. So not only is it killing the body, but it's also those people that aren't saved, that aren't believers in Christ now, are then swallowed up in hell. And then after that, the fifth seal, you have the countless saints who are beginning to become martyrs. And so I'm of the belief that when the rapture happens, people are going to see this. I used to think that they wouldn't. They would just see like a pile of clothes and we'd be disappeared, right? Or if you had a hearing aid or a heart, pacemaker or something, that would just be laying on your clothes. But I think it was Don Perkins that was talking about, the first time I heard it was like, I think they're going to see us be translated. Like the translation and the resurrection is going to happen in the blink of an eye, but it doesn't say we're immediately removed from that place. And if we look at scripture, every other person that was, with the exception of, I'm trying to think who was, Enoch. Everybody else they saw him. Elijah, they saw Elijah go up. They saw the two witnesses in Revelation 11. They stand up on their feet, and then they hear the voice from heaven saying, "Come up here." Then they're shot up. So it may be something like that, to where, and that may be also what reinforces people's belief that, that's what reinforces or helps the soul harvest after the rapture. It's one of the greatest soul harvests of all time, where so many people now turn to faith in Christ. But because of that, the enemy now is starting to lose control. He starts to cut them down and quickly martyr them so that they don't derail his plans for this one world system. And then here on the left, or to the right of that, or the sixth seal, obviously you have the great cosmic disturbances and earthquakes. And so one of the things I wasn't 100% sure on, and I'm still kind of on the fence on this, is when these seal judgments ride forth, Do they just ride until the seventh seal and then they stop? And then the seven seals, I think they're ordered, they're opened, and they happen or sequentially. But I know that the rider on the white horse will ride the entire length of the tribulation. And it makes sense to me that the rider on the red horse, taking peace from the earth, that all these horsemen ride throughout the length of the full 7 years. So I don't know if the sixth seal is then in conjunction with the sixth bowl judgment. It seems like they're a lot of the same things, but I'm not super dogmatic on that. I'm going to try and get Bill Salas on one day, and I think I like the way he explains this in his thinking. I think I've probably become more in tune with what he thinks about how these seals are open and stuff. So, and then you have the trumpet judgments, and then I've shared with you my thoughts on the 1/3 of the seas turning to blood and the 1/3 of the trees and the earth and the grass being burned up. I think that's the Americas and the Atlantic. And then you have the rest of the trumpets that are blown, and this really begins to mess with people as the supernatural now becomes kind of the normal in the world, and it's just going to be something people are going to have to contend with at that point. Now, one of the things I did want to mention quickly is that the day of the Lord, that phrase, it's used two different ways in the Old Testament and in the New Testament. In one sense, it is a specific day, and I believe that day to be the second coming, the actual day that Christ returns and the skies peeled open and he comes with the armies of heaven and so forth and destroys everybody at Armageddon. But the day of the Lord is also used in a general sense, in the sense that it's talking about this entire time period. So it begins with the rapture of the church, and it will end at the end of the millennial kingdom. So this is a very wide, long stretch of time, but there's also a specific reference within there. So there's two different ways that's used. Now, one of the things I wasn't entirely sure on is the seven thunders. There's seven thunders that are announced, but then John's told not to write them down. So that comes after the sixth trumpet, but before the seventh trumpet. And we don't know what those are. Those presumably are some kind of judgment that none of us, people aren't going to know until they happen. So whatever those are, I'm sure could be quite terrifying. So right there in the middle, we have the abomination of desolation. And this is where the Antichrist is assassinated, or there's an attempted assassination on his life. And I believe it's at this point that he goes from being the son of perdition or from being the lawless one to the son of perdition, which is the title that the only other person in the book, in the Bible, that shares that is Judas Iscariot. And Judas had become possessed by Satan himself at that point. So I think this is very reminiscent to that. If you think about the war in heaven, this last final attempted coup d'etat by Satan and the fallen angels to kind of overthrow heaven, they're cast down to earth. Now they're limited to the earth. They can't go anywhere but the earth. If you think about what fallen angels are capable of doing today, we see it on the news every day, or see it online every day. These UFO things that are appearing and disappearing, they'll fly across the sky and they'll just disappear. And so most of the experts now are not even calling these things extraterrestrial anymore. They're calling them ultra terrestrial, meaning that they're not just from Earth. They're not even from our dimension. They can kind of go in and out of our dimension at will. So this is a change in vernacular that's happened with regards to UFOs. But now at the midpoint, they're confined to Earth. They can't leave Earth anymore, and they're confined to this dimension or this reality. So they're confined to this dimension reality, and this is where the Antichrist goes from being the lawless one to being, now he is fully indwelt by Satan. It seems like he's fully indwelt by Satan himself, as the son of perdition. And at this point, the Jews that are in Jerusalem and Judea that Jesus references there in Matthew 24, they are told to look for this. When they see this happen, to run. Don't even grab your jacket. Don't grab your clothes or nothing. Just get your family and flee. And I put the picture there of Petra because this is really the only logical place from Jerusalem that they could go to that would provide them some sort of safety or sanctuary. Yeah. And are you gonna grab the kids?
No.
You want to get them all?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So, okay. Say hi. Okay.
This is where it's all going.
That's not funny. Come here. All right. I get her. My lovely, beautiful wife. So now moving into the bowl judgments. This is, to me, the bowl judgments do not encompass a whole lot of time. In fact, it may be just the last 6 months of the entire tribulation period, because of what things are happening. You have grievous sores that appear on all those people that have the mark of the beast. I mean, painful sores. These are just people are wishing to die. You know, it's really, really terrible. All of the seas turn to blood now, and you can only imagine the stench of all of the seas, all of the oceans dying, and all the sea life in it's dead and rotting and washing up on the beach. I mean, this is going to be terrible. You have all of fresh water turning to blood. And so we know people can't live very long without fresh water. So whatever happens with this, whether they're supernaturally kept alive, but they're just dehydrated, cottonmouth, can't think because they can't even get any water to drink now. This is a foretaste of what hell is going to be like, or foreshadowing of what hell is going to be like. And then men are scorched by the sun. The sun does something that, you know, whether it's some type of, like, I'm not a sun expert or anything like that, but like maybe some type of mini micro something supernova to some kind of degree, or maybe it's some massive solar flare, solar storm that hits the earth and just bakes everything. Not really sure how that plays out, but the earth is scorched by the sun, and then it turns into this incredibly painful darkness. Now, all three of those things, you would not be able to live very long. So this is why I think that the bowl judgments tends to be right at the very end. And as the world becomes incredibly dark, and depending on where the Antichrist sets up his headquarters, it presumably they're right there in the Middle East somewhere. It's darkness over this whole place, right? This whole kingdom. And then from the east, you have the kings of the east coming forward. The Euphrates is dried up. These angels that were held there, and the frogs that go forth, the demonic frogs that go forth and draws all these nations to bring them. Now are beginning to march or drive or ride the Iron Silk Road, whatever the railway system is. They end up making their way to the Valley of Megiddo and stage there. They stage in that valley and are going to beginning to make their preparations to move on Jerusalem and to, I think, attack the Antichrist. And this is where Christ appears and the sky rolls back. And instead of fighting the Antichrist, they turn and point their guns at Jesus and begin to try to fight him. And then this is where this whole Armageddon campaign, happens. And now they've got blood up to the horse's bridle, and you've got these 100-pound hailstones that are hitting the earth and pummeling everything. Those hailstones begin to melt, right? And as they melt, they turn everything into mud and water, and now you've got blood mixed in there, and it's just a really nasty place to be. And lastly, you've got the beginning of what the second coming. You've got the additional 75 days, which I think is probably for some kind of cleanup operations around the world, and probably some terraforming of the earth at that time, plus the sheep and goat judgment. And then the wedding supper of the Lamb happens, and then the millennial kingdom begins. And so we're there for 1,000 years, and you and I are going to be there in our glorified bodies, and we'll be helping govern the planet. And as those few people come on the scene that survive the tribulation and make it through the sheep and goat judgment and now enter into the kingdom in their physical bodies, begin to repopulate the earth, the earth will experience a population boom like it's never seen in history at any point in time. Because one, all of the earth is going to be inhabitable. That means that the Antarctic people will be living in the Antarctic because it's going to be lush green grass and trees, and people will be living in the Sahara Desert, which again will become completely arable farming land and rolling hills and trees and rivers and things like that. Everywhere will be inhabitable. I don't know if like the continents come back together to form some kind of supercontinent or what all that happens, but everywhere in the world is going to be inhabitable. And people are going to be able to live for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. And so the population is quickly going to balloon up. And so, you and I will be, I'll probably be a janitor for some system out there, some kingdom business, and sweeping and mopping the floors. And that's just what I do. Or maybe over a little village or something, but some people will be over big cities. And so those little old ladies in soft tennis shoes that were just mighty prayer warriors, they're going to be governing cities. It might sound terrifying to some of them right now, but you will. And trust me, when that day comes, you'll be prepared for it. You'll be ready for it. And at the same time, we'll be able to travel at the speed of thought. We won't be confined to this earth because we'll be able to travel interdimensionally across the universe, the solar system, whatever. We'll be able just to move about because we're no longer in those mortal bodies that are, right now we can only live in this small little. If you think about the Earth is small in comparison to the other planets in our solar system. But even on the Earth, there's only this small little band, this little strip of atmosphere that we can survive in without having to wear tanks and oxygen mask and Arctic suits and things like that. There's a small little place in this universe that we exist in. And but when we're in our glorified immortal bodies, we can go anywhere. We can travel to the sun. We could stand there in front of the sun and watch it, and it won't hurt us. Or we can go to the furthest other side of the universe at a speed of thought. And again, not having oxygen or none of that. In fact, I don't remember who it was. Somebody was talking about that we won't have blood. We won't have blood because we don't have organs. And we won't have organs. We won't need organs, right? You need blood to have organs, and we won't have organs, so we won't have blood either. We'll just be flesh and bone, like it talks about in I think it was Adam and Eve. She is flesh of my flesh and bone of my bone. And it wasn't until sin came in that now we become mortal, and in that mortality, you have to have organs to pump blood to keep your body going. And then that's what begins to fall apart. So. And then, at the end of this time, there is a short season that Satan is loosed from his chains in the abyss. And he's able to go forth and bring this mighty army from all over the world that will be reminiscent of Gog and Magog conflict. And that's how big that coalition will be in Gog Magog. And so this huge coalition at the end of the millennial kingdom, who, these people living at that time, they won't know anything different. They won't know what it's like to have lived in the world before the second coming. Just like we don't know what it's like to live in the world before the flood. All we know is what little bit of information is in there in Genesis 5 and 6 and, some other passages, but there's not much to tell us what the world was like. And so a lot of us, I think, will be sharing and almost serving as historians as well too, talking about the way the world was before and why God had to judge the world and all the things that happened. We'll be eyewitnesses to these things, which is why being alive right now in this time period is very exciting for me, and it should be for you. And then at the end of that, Satan, this whole army comes against Christ, who's ruling and reigning from Jerusalem, and they are wiped out in a moment. And then boom, the great white throne judgment happens. So the wicked of all time, now going all the way back to Cain, going forward, are going to be standing there in judgment. They're going to be judged according to their works. So trust me, if you're trusting in your works to save you, that's not something you really want. So they're going to be judged for their works, and then they will be cast into the lake of fire. And then even hell will be cast into the lake of fire, and death will be cast into the lake of fire. And then all of that will be confined to wherever hell is, or wherever the lake of fire is going to be for all eternity. That's where they'll spend the rest of eternity, in this lake of fire. It will never, ever, ever end. And for us, we enter into the eternal order of the ages. And God has so many things in store for us that we can't even really wrap our minds around what's going to happen coming in the future. So we're here. We're at the end. So keep running your race wherever you are, whatever God's called you to do. Keep running. Keep doing the things that God's called you to do. Keep praying. Keep fighting for your family. Keep praying for your sons and daughters and co-workers and people that are mixed up in disastrous lifestyles. Keep fighting for them. Keep praying for them. Keep sharing the gospel with these people, and keep doing what God's called you to do, wherever that is that He's called you to do it at. And I love this passage here, and it says, "And behold, I am coming quickly, and my reward is with me, to give everyone according to his work. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, the first and the last." So the Lord is coming, and His reward is with Him, first for the church, and then for Israel at the second coming. And the very last folks, people that are part of the last resurrection, are going to be really just there to stand judgment, and then they're cast into the lake of fire for the second death. Okay, so there's that. Hopefully you can get it. It's on my Telegram. It's on my website. Although I think if you get it on the Telegram, you probably will be able to blow up full size. But hopefully you find it. It's beneficial to you. Use it for a Bible study. Use it for your own personal whatever. Fact check me. If you don't think I'm right, say, hey, you got this one part wrong, or you think, look, again, I'd say email me, but there's things on here that I don't know specifically when exactly they happen. Like the Bema judgment. I don't know when in the order of everything happens. I have it up there, and it's in the eternal time frame, the eternal order of the ages. So, or the inside of eternity. So that how that time matches up with where we are today, I have no idea how that factors in. So, okay, let me get to the questions here. Let me stop sharing this. Okay. Sarah, I won't be able to get to all of the questions. I have to take my daughter to work. Okay. So this is today. Okay, Jackie Christ, if the scriptures aren't unveiled to believers or to unbelievers, how will they be unveiled to Satan? How are they unveiled to Satan himself? I know he reads it, but he can't understand it without the Holy Spirit. Or aren't unveiled to unbelievers. They are unveiled to unbelievers in a very kind of profound way. That you think back to the early church, right? When they were talking about communion, we're looking at things being symbolic with the bread and the wine, and they're thinking these guys are cannibals. They're eating flesh and they're drinking blood, right? They just could not wrap their mind around that these things represent something. And so I think on a surface level, a non-believer can read the Bible, but he's got these scales over his eyes or her eyes, and they can't get what the Bible's trying to say to them. And so that is where I think Satan is in the same regard, where he has the added bonus of having lived through all of this time. So he knows historically, like he knows what year he was born exactly. He knows what year Christ died exactly. He was there. Whereas we don't know that. We just have a general time frame. Some people say 5 BC, 4 BC, 3 BC. Some people think Christ was crucified in 30 AD, 31, 32, 33. We have a general time frame, but we don't know the specifics. So he has that knowledge of that. But a lot of these plans and things that are in prophecy, he's seeing them, but he's also and he might be in some way trying to prepare for these things, or trying to stop these things from happening so that he has more time. But he can't affect the change of the time. He can't affect the prophetic timeline. He's constantly trying to adapt to it. And so, and he might to some degree believe it because he knows God is real. He knows Jesus is God in the flesh. He knows the Holy Spirit's real. He knows heaven's real, hell's real. I mean, that why go through all, if hell wasn't that bad, why go through all this and try to avoid it at all costs? I mean, the fallen angels and Satan are terrified of hell. They're terrified of the abyss. They don't want to go there. They don't. And they are doing everything they can to not go there. And you've got people here on earth they're ignorant. They have no concept of what lies ahead for them, because they're going to die in their sins and they're going to spend eternity in this place that even Satan and his demonic henchmen are terrified of going to, because they know it's real. So, Torres, did you hear about the UN vote? Yeah, I heard about that. Again, Genesis 12:3. I will bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you. So I think that this is par for the course in terms of, as things keep moving forward, it's just going to keep getting worse and worse, and there's going to be more terrible things happening all over. And that question, Pete, have you read Stacy Sachs' book on Revelation 12? She's a student of Ken Johnson and definitely is along the line that you have taught on it in more depth. I don't even know who Stacy Sachs is. If you send me an email with her link, or I guess I could look her up, but I don't know who that is. And that, again, the question is, the U.S. leaders really concerned about the military power or empowering the one world government? I think on one hand, you've got a lot of American leaders that know we're at the end of our rope. And so they're going along with all this because they want to see that the next table, wherever that next table is for this new global system. And I think also you have a lot of leaders that don't believe that, but they also don't believe the Bible either. They think that things are just going to keep going on the way it is, and we've got to do what we can to preserve American power, American influence, and so on and so forth. So they're looking at this purely from like a geopolitical perspective, sort of like an America First kind of concept, but they don't necessarily have to be MAGA. They just don't believe the world's going to end tomorrow. They don't believe it's going to end 50 years from now. They think America will still be here 50 years from now. I think that's probably the predominant view. So they're concerned about where things are going, but they're only looking at this from a geopolitical perspective. Heather, question, does this turning on Israel at the UN, as explained by Amir Safadi this morning, bode anything bad based on Bill Clinton? Yes, it does. I really do. I think it's going to start happening more and more places. And in my article that's coming out about World War III, I think we'll touch on a lot of that. Aldo, question, could it be possible the Antichrist is in a place that sees no wars? Switzerland, as example, all the big wars seem to start or happen near there. Yeah, it's possible. Ireland is also neutral. If I understand their politics correctly, they're not part of NATO. And I think they've tried to position themselves as being kind of like Switzerland and always kind of being in a state of neutrality, political neutrality. But somewhere, yeah. But he could also be a military leader. Said he trusted in the God of fortresses. He may be some type of political leader or some type of military leader that turns into a political leader. Pete, how is your drone situation looking like? I don't really know what you mean. Oh, how is our drone situation looking like? I think, given the shortcomings in recruitment and retention for the military forces, I think given the exponential leaps in technology that we seem to be going forward with, that a lot of our conventional military equipment is becoming increasingly neutered in terms of what's coming. And so I think drone technology is going to be a huge part of what's coming. And in particular with swarming technology, you can make these, because when you think about like an F-35, right? An F-35 cost, I don't know, $20 billion to make, or $100 billion, whatever it is. And that thing can be taken out by a swarm of little drones that are like, bird size or whatever. And you just swarm them into this jet, and then it hits their engines or whatever the case is and takes out that jet. And you've lost, maybe, I don't know, $10,000 to make all these drones. And you've just taken out something that costs $22 billion to make and takes forever to learn how to fly. I mean, the cost benefit analysis on this is way, way, way skewed to making drones. Question, Pete, how long do you think the church will be able to stay here considering all that's going on with AI wars? Are you asking how long till the rapture? I don't know. I think, again, if my assumption is correct in belief that we're in this spiritual utero, I mean, to me, obviously, then that kind of lines up with the other things, Hosea 6, Psalm 90, the fig tree parable. I mean, all the different things that are speaking to time. It seems that we're there. I mean, we're ready to be born any day now. So I don't know specifically when though, but okay. Panther Gal, why do you think Russia was attacked? Well, I don't even know that it matters what we think. It's what does the Russians think? What does Putin think? And he thinks it was Ukraine, that Ukraine put them up to this. So he hired some mercenaries. Zelensky hired some mercenaries from Tajikistan or wherever they're from and paid them to go in and shoot up this theater. And then they tried to flee back to, I think they were trying to get into Belarus down to Ukraine or go straight into Ukraine, probably through Belarus through to Ukraine. And they got caught. And so now he believes, or at least he's saying this publicly. I don't know what he believes privately, but he's saying this publicly that Ukraine was up to this. So further justification for laying waste to Ukraine. Gloria Minix, Hebrews 9:27. How can I explain to my bunch that if you're not watching, you will still go if you're saved? They think you can lose your salvation. That verse stumps me. Let me pull that up real quick. $9:27. And as it is appointed for men to die once, but after this, the judgment. So Christ was offered once to bear the sins of many. To those who eagerly await for him, he will appear a second time apart from sin for salvation. This is one of those passages that I feel like speaks to the generality of, or the norm, right? But there are exceptions to the norm. So it says it is appointed for man to die once and then judgment. Obviously, we know there's people like Lazarus and other people that were resurrected from the dead who will have died twice. And then there's a couple of folks who never died, Enoch and Elijah. So this is speaking about the normal events for all of human history, that men are born, they live, and they die. Again, there are several exceptions of people being born and never dying, Enoch and Elijah. And there are people that are born and die, and then they're resurrected, and then some down the road they die again. So then those are the exceptions to the norm. Now, with that said, how can I explain to my bunch that if you are not watching, you will still go if you're saved? Yeah, if you're born again, your salvation does not depend on your eschatological position on your understanding of how everything shakes out. If you're pre-wrath or post-trib or preterist or amillennial, kingdom now, whatever, when the rapture happens, and if you're a Christian, you're going up. Now, you're gonna have to answer for if you're one of those guys out there that railed against the pre-trib rapture and your whole ministry is centered on attacking pre-tribbers and all that. You're going to have to answer to Christ himself for that stuff. Just like I'm going to have to answer for how I treat people or the things I got wrong in my ministry and so on and so forth. So, I mean, I'm just saying that if you're born again, you're going up, period, end of story. And again, to that norm versus the exception to the norm, this church, the rapture of the church is the exception to the rule. There's only one rapture going to happen, right? And we're in this one generation, this one body of believers. Remember I talked about us being singularly corporate? We are going to go up. We're the body. Christ is the head. We're part of that. Okay. Diane, question. Jack Hibbs talked about the military book Left of Bang. Have you read it? It seems to be already winning as a military strategy. I don't know. I have not heard it. I will have to look it up. Left of Bang. Okay. All right. I will look that up, Diane, and get back to you on that. BPNE, have you ever listened to Craig Bong? He was on Jay. I don't know who Craig Bong is. I will look him up too. Tempa Fate. Q, the frozen embryos from IVF, these will be raptured as babies. They are alive. They will get glorified bodies just like stillborn or aborted or miscarried babies. These will get glorified bodies. Yes. If they have a human soul, they will go up. If they're aborted, miscarried, etc. In fact, I would think aborted babies and those that are miscarried are now in their spirit, in their bodies. They're perfect, glorified, spiritual age. So if a child is aborted, they're now in the presence of the Lord in whatever age that is. And I'm assuming we're all going to be the same age. So we'll probably be like 33 or whatever that number is, if that means anything. There will be some like adults. We'll be like Adam and Eve were. Adam and Eve weren't created as infants. Adam and Eve weren't created as old men and like an old man and old woman. They were just in the prime of their life. So whatever age that is, maybe 20, 25. And you'll be in that state forever, but in a glorified immortal body. Right now, they are in a spirit form, awaiting their glorified body, as Paul and Peter alluded to. Our body right now is like a tent, and to be without your body means you're naked. So you're just in the spirit form, and they're waiting for their glorified immortal bodies, which are like a building made by God. These things are sturdy and will endure everything. Question, Craig Bong on Janine Duval's channel, and he mentioned that Prince Charles signed a peace treaty at the COP28 meeting and said that King Charles is planning on signing a treaty. I don't know if this guy thinks King Charles is the Antichrist. I don't really think about King Charles at all as having much to do with anything. But no, I don't. I'm not familiar with that. Natalia Hurst, question, in light of everything happening now, would it be safe to say that America is on her way out? Yes. Absolutely. Be Rich. My pastor is a sovereignty pastor. Could that be why he won't mention we are living in the end times? I'm baffled why he has not said one word. He always said God is sovereign over all. Yeah, I mean, I believe God is sovereign over all, but if that's your whole theology, then your Bible would just really have like one verse. God is sovereign. Trust Jesus Christ for salvation, or else. And that's it. Okay, what else do you have to teach on? I mean, why do we have the entirety of the Holy Bible? Why did God preserve it the way he did for us? 66 books, 40 authors, written over, 2,000 years, on 3 continents by men from all different walks of life in 3 different languages. And I mean, why go through all of that if you're only going to teach God is sovereign? God is sovereign, but he's also a lot of other things too. He's love, he's mercy, he's justice, he's perfectness, righteousness, holiness. He declares the end from the beginning. He tells us these things ahead of time so that when they happen, it'll bolster our faith. Okay, question, Sandstone. What do you think about the resurrection sunrise services? I don't know. I never really thought about it like that. I don't think there's anything wrong with them. I don't believe in Good Friday, obviously. I mean, I think Christ was crucified on a Thursday. So Thursday night would be the first night, or first day, and I guess the first night, depending on when they put him into the actual tomb, if it was still daylight. And then Friday, Saturday, and then he rose on that third day. Hi, Pete, from Catherine. God bless you. Question, what do you think America not being mentioned means that America is integrated into the 10 kingdoms? Yeah, I don't think America disappears right at the rapture when she collapses. I think that she's probably initially absorbed into one of these regions, 10 regions. I kind of do think that by the trumpet judgments, by the time those happen near the middle point, that's when, if my theory is correct, then that's when everything kind of goes away. You ready? Okay. All right, guys, I have to run. Let's see. Depending on the idea of the seals are actually the gap period after the rapture. Bill Salas says this is why the fifth seal. No, so I don't believe that the seals are part of the gap. And I think that's probably where Bill and I would disagree on that. I think the seals, the opening of the first seal is happens at Daniel 9:27, and then that happens. Boom. They're kind of right next to each other. Gwenstone, so if they see us transform and go, does that mean that we'll see the dead in Christ get their new body and go? Yeah, I mean, we should. Again, we'll have to wait and see until it happens, but my understanding is that's the way it will play out. They'll get the dead in Christ will go first, and then we'll go right after. Okay, so guys, I have to run. I apologize for the quick departure out of here. Thank you for your time, for your prayer, support, all that. I will be on Friday with Stand Up for the Truth, and then if I have time Friday, I may do the Rumble Live. But the kids are off Thursday and Friday for Easter weekend, so I don't know really what my schedule will look like. Look for that article to come out this week at some point. It's called World War III from Impossible to Inevitable. I'm really stoked about this, and God bless you guys. Thank you for your time, and love you. And I'll see you later this week. Bye.